this started out as an attempt to think about morality in the context of the ethnography that I'm familiar with on egalitarian hunter-gatherers. And the reason I'm thinking about morality is that in September, Camilla and I have organised an ASA panel on laughter, bodies and the evolution of morality. So it's kind of in the air. But it was also a really good opportunity to go back and look at the Politics of Eros paper, because it was written a long time ago as part of my thesis. And once it was published, it kind of just went off and I moved on to other things. But I have been realizing that really what the Politics of Eros is talking about is another kind of moral community that is coming from within the collective body as opposed to being imposed upon it. And so this is really a work in progress. It's an attempt to start to bring in some of the interest in how that moral community is established and shared with the work specifically on women's coalitions. And I'd like to talk a wee bit about the Politics of Eros paper again, just to reiterate the main points there, and then move on to talking more about these two substances in the Mbengele and Juntois world that are ekila and nom. They're two polysemic terms that refer to a whole corpus of physical and cultural and cosmological elements. But they're both very strongly located in the body, and specifically in the kind of solar plexus area of the body. So, so my paper's just vanished off the screen. Chris, have you any ideas as to your thing, your magnifying facility is just coming up?
It's gone slow again. Oh, that's happening. Well, obviously, I'm trying pressing that damn thing. Oh, there we are.
There we are. Okay. So I'm going to start by asking what connects cognitive and emotional intelligence. Because there's an in-between there that isn't often discussed. We know all about cognitive intelligence. It's a big point of discussion at the moment, and we're hearing a little bit more about emotional intelligence. But I want to begin to open up the idea of a physical morality that sits between the cognitive and emotional, and kind of is the foundation for everything else. And I want to ask what drives the extraordinary human interest in sharing and caring, as Sarah Hardy phrases it, using the Mbengele and Juntois terms ekila and nom respectively. I'm going to propose that morality is fundamentally a corporeal element. It has to be viscerally experienced in order to remain live. I want to suggest that morality, therefore, is intrinsically revolutionary. This means that in order to survive, moral systems have to remain in flux. They have to remain in motion. The moment they settle, taking either the shape of divine right or of the secular state, they tend to assume a fixed quality with, you find walls and laws and this punitive social and later emotional economy. So moral systems that get static tend to become inherently antisocial, ironically, and anti-freedom, the primary function being to privatize and administer power as opposed to diffuse power out through the community. Ekila and nom are something else. They're physical accountability, physical responsibility. You're not talking here about obedience You're not talking about an imposed moral accountability. This is organic, homegrown, localized accountability, because it's rooted in the body of each individual within the community from birth onwards. So before going any further, I want to look at the theory of social contract as developed by Thomas Hobbes, because Hobbes was a very important thinker in developing this idea of the possibilities as either a fundamentally violent and miserable primitive society with man pitted against man, or the sophisticated state societies where you have these rational, self-interested individuals who'll agree to surrender their independence in the interests of peace and security, and by mutual consent appoint a kind of supreme ruler. The ruler would guarantee their collective defence and their personal security, and in return they'd obey his laws and give him complete obedience. So this is essentially a morally justified agreement made among individuals that brings formal society into existence. And it's important because it's often used to demonstrate the value of government and the grounds for political dominion, obligation and authority. In the move away from the insecurity of the stateless society, citizens are apparently agreeing to respect and obey a new state order in exchange for stability and security. This stability and security that Hobbes argued only a system of political rule could provide. So the social contract theories of Hobbes and Locke start from the concept of man in a primitive state without political authority or formal checks on the behaviour of individuals, going beyond that into a developed social and political life guided by a principle of natural law. And natural law theory held that there were immutable principles of law that existed as part of the natural world that would define what's right, just and good for man. These principles were discoverable by the use of reason, and all people were subject to their laws. And I'm very interested in this kind of rational paternity authority figure that appears almost on cue anywhere that we're talking about political agency, power, structure or security. To my eye, this figure is essentially one face of the good cop, bad cop, split personality of the alpha male. It's the other side of a form of submission to authority, what I think of as the control and command mentality. Against it, we have something else entirely. This collective self that we were discussing this morning in the Viva, which is absolutely fizzing with its continual movement, its the continual movement of its constituent parts, and which balks at any whiff of obedience. The kind of self that Bakhtin was writing about so beautifully in Bakhtin's world, in Rabelais and his world. So there are two big assumptions here which have travelled a long way, deep into the recesses of modern political theory, as well as into areas of political organisation and society. And the first is that human communities without any discernible hierarchy, no government, no leaders, no bosses, are inherently unstable and threatening to their members, at best simple and at worst destructive. The second big assumption is that state society, that kind of self-protective contract whereby we relinquish personal power to government in exchange for security, is a good thing. So hunter-gatherers and social sexual egalitarianism tends to equal simple, undeveloped, potentially threatening the life that Hobbes described as solitary, poor, nasty, brutish and short. And I know that that's something of a cliche, but I'm talking about two kind of models for the way in which people are able to organise and experience power. I'd like to develop another kind of picture, another kind of moral collective. And it's a picture that has extended out of the article on the politics of Eros. And this picture takes the idea of a ritually collectivized body, in this case the collective female body, as the origin of other moral inclinations and observances. Before getting to what Nom and Aquila have to do with this other kind of moral community, I want to digress to that paper because I think it's relevant as the other side of Hobbes' primitive man, with his need for delegated power and the paternal state. And I was proposing in that article that by examining the language of the body in Yaka or Mbuti, Mbengele ritual dialogue, we could start to develop an alternative understanding of the person, one in which biology and sex were not inherently problematic because the move to deconstruct the body is based on that assumption and could in fact be a source of great cultural power and also an organising force. The elaboration, the performative nature of sex, I was arguing in that paper, is an expansion rather than construction. So you have this deprivatizing of the body and its ability to move out into cultural fields and shape a power pendulum that's moving constantly in the society. The stress was, throughout that article, was on the discursive potential of the collective body. And I was using the term, the politics of Eros, to refer to a whole kind of creative ritual complex that stresses the power of sex, procreation, laughter, dance, this world of blood and breath over the possibility of hierarchy and closure. So biology was always becoming cultural. And gender was what coalesced in the ritual tension between the sexes, what Victor Turner described as a play of forces working out continually. Going back to the politics of Eros after a long time, there's this sense of the injection and contraction of power through that paper, this oscillation between the sexes and between individual desire and group equilibrium. And I argued that in order to produce that piston-like motion, poles were required, but using Bakhtin's writing on the collective body and the culture of laughter, it was not the individual life of the body. It wasn't, as he says, the drama of an individual body or a private material way of life. It was the great generic body of the people. And that point's crucial in thinking through the move from sex to gender. So we weren't talking about a private biological body severed by a long history of political religious repression from its own language. And Jackson had backed that up with his work on the power of dance and music in ritual dialogue, noting that the movement and music and dance of collective ritual bodies were what promoted a sense of levity and openness both in body and mind, which verbal and cognitive forms, he says, ordinarily inhibit. So there was in that paper a strong interest in the kind of transformative effects of dance on community politics and the way in which people like the Mbengele or the Mbuti or the Yaka or the Juntwa are using these kind of transcendent moments, this really heightened emotional state and feel-good element to manage political fields in a way that is quite extraordinary, because whenever you have the entire community involved in these big back and forth dialogues, there's no longer any need for the big boss. You have people containing and acting out power continually. So dance has a defining quality here, and I argued that these and other Mukundi Masana, like Ngoku, Ejengi, weren't additional to political life in the absence of hierarchy, but were central egalitarian forces. I should have said really that in that paper, one of the central part of it was bringing out what women are doing in their collective public dances, and this very graphic ribald language that's used during women's dances, where they'll clear the camp and storm through ostensibly beautified and attractive and doing these very sensual dances, but at the same time completely inviolable, marked off as inviolable, and able to capitalize on that to really, bring home their temporary ritual authority. And I had begun with the attempt to describe an alternative kind of body politics, and with the idea of non-coercive power, a power defined as being for relationship, self-possession, joy, social equilibrium, and connected it to these big collective dances. Using the term in that paper, The Politics of Eros, was part of an attempt to stay faithful to this culture of the body that draws in the bigger rituals and the pendulum between male and female ritual coalitions, and then that low-level buzz of song and dance and motion that's kept going in any community. And the constant focus on the interchange between the sexes. And I think that issue of sexual tension that Colin Turnbull brought out so well in his writing on the Mbuti is really the elephant in the room in gender studies and often in the social sciences generally. It's something that we tend not to discuss as much in its cultural form. Once things move into culture, we talk about gender and the sex, the biology, the body, the reproductivity. That whole kind of earthy sense of physical power tends to be pushed to the periphery. So the body that we were finding in these big licentious yaka dances was, I realized writing that article, closer to the Rabelaisian person. It was an open, ambivalent body whose jokes were, as Bakhtin says, particles of an immense whole, of the popular carnival spirit of the world that laughs. I argued that the body normatively at work in Yaka ethnography had a kinship with the body that only occasionally breaks through the moral veil of hierarchical culture, where Bourdieu emphasizes that male domination tends to restrict women's verbal consciousness. Their discourse is dominated by the male values of virility, so any reference to specifically female sexual interests is excluded. You had here this very clearly unrestricted verbal consciousness of Mbengele or Bayaka women's physical presence. And that collective female body with its contradictory signaling power was vibrantly, publicly pushing back at every opportunity with its own physical, visceral language to do with contact and reproductive solidarity and sensuality. I came to the conclusion that this was the language of a kind of love that we don't often get to see in our public culture anymore, dominated as it is by the romantic dyad, and by the focus on the priorities that are to do really with the male collective body, territory, virility, conquest. This kind of big Mbengele body was speaking to or about a corresponding principle whose urge was to break off or close, and yet as long as the two groups remained in dialogue, balance was maintained. So I don't know if that's clear. What I was trying to bring out is that in cultures where the male body has a strong collective presence, and I think so much really does come at origin out of the early kind of deep history of the body, that without a corresponding female collective asserting the priorities of that collective female body, you have an immediate loss of balance and an immediate kind of freezing of the power pendulum. It's not, I'm focusing here on women's collective expressions of power. Of course, among the Benjele, men have an equally strong collective coalitionary voice that they're continually asserting as well. But you need both in order for the moral community to remain plain, and in order for power to be able to circulate through the entire society. You just have to have both these strong collective bodies, and that comes out really well in Marilyn Strathern's work on the Melanesian male collective body, asserting dominance continually over individual women. So what I was trying to assemble using the work of Colin Turnbull, Michelle Kisluke and Jerome Lewis's wonderful ethnography on the Mbengele was the speaking body at the pivot of this power pendulum. This was the body that had to be repressed by orders where hierarchy is the dominant principle. But as Bakhtin had argued, if you take away the static ideology of hierarchy, it's like lifting a wedge out of something that's been blocked. The body kind of starts to laugh, and things start to get interesting, and the pendulum starts to move back and forth again. And what's striking, reading Bakhtin's writing on the world of carnival and this laughing body animated by strings of abuse and bawdy jokes, is the parallel with so much of the data on hunter-gatherer ritual life. So I found his work then, and I still find it very important in thinking through the political nature of Yaka women's social collectives, with this spotlight on procreative sex and corporeal power generally. And it's important too, Bakhtin's work is quite important in setting into our political terms the repercussions of the loss of that collective maternal body from the cultural field. The body that once offered such a kind of joyful counter to male dominance. The Eros paper was describing this literal and metaphorical dance, this politics rooted in motion. And I argued that public ritual performances among the Benjele or the Bayaka or the Mbuti were operating as a powerful body statement on behalf of egalitarian reality. These exchanges were a means of creating society. They weren't one of society's tools. They weren't just a nice offshoot of something else. The conversation they ignited between the sexes was the structure of social life itself, which suggests that antagonism is explored as part of a cultural conversation that's necessary and positive. So you kind of would have tension being continually juggled as a creative force. In obedience-oriented cultures, it's normal to attempt to resolve social antagonism from an ethical moral stance formed in the belief about dualism, not as a conversation, but as a permanently closed door. But resolution in such contexts is potentially the point at which dialogic freezes, motion stops, and hierarchy floods the interpersonal field. So the politics of Eros was trying to bring out that somatic conversation that was being maintained between the sexes. And of course the political implications of that way of managing power, the way the power field was kept plain by the work of the sexes, is enormous. So, following on from that, I would like to read a wee bit about both the Juntois nom, the Juntois substance nom, and the Mbengele term ekila, to see what kind of body these might point to or elaborate alongside that collective ritual male and female coalitionary self. moving away from traditional ideas of morality as something planted in our heads, a set of concepts or rules or constraints agreed on and listed, like the Ten Commandments, to compel people to behave themselves. This is what I'm calling corporeal morality. It's a whole other kind of accountability. And I'm going to just read directly from this fantastic it's a follow-up really to the work of the two anthropologists involved here, Richard Katz and Megan Beasley, but it was designed to be accessible to non-specialists. So it's called Healing Makes Our Hearts Happy. And here they're talking about nom, this substance nom that permeates all of Juntois life, particularly the dances, the healing dances. Some anthropologists have translated nom as medicine, but it is more than just medicine. Nom is energy, spiritual energy. There are many referents for nom, and the limits to these referents are purposely ambiguous. Things of power, including things out of the ordinary, like herbal medicines, African sorcery, menstrual blood, the vapor trail of a jet, are among the contexts in which the word nom is used. We were constantly frustrated in any attempt to pin down its meaning. Juntois people say nom is a thing unto itself. But in whatever form or function, nom is felt as strong, and the word nom itself carries the power of nom. Nom is invisible, though it can be seen and picked up by experienced healers during a state of enhanced awareness. It's located only by its existence in a particular form, whether it be a person, a song. Nom isn't personalized nor personified. Nobody can possess it exclusively nor control it completely. This primary force in the Juntois world universe of experience is at its strongest in the healing dance. It resides in the dance fire, in the healing songs, and most of all in the bodies of the healers, concentrated in the pit of their stomachs and the base of their spines. The dance activates the nom in the healers. Their singing and their dance movements, they say, heat up the nom. When it boils, it vaporizes and rises up the spine. And they quote one of the healers as saying, "It hurts. It's like fire. It burns you." As nom reaches the base of the healer's skull, they enter a state of transcendence. Once in this state, the dancer can heal. Often translated as trance, it's actually a state of enhanced awareness in which healers can travel physically and psychically over great distances. But laughter is never far away. The same strict Western distinction between the sacred and profane doesn't exist for the Juntoisie. The dance is their most intensely spiritual event, but during it they exchange some of their spiciest jokes and tease each other with friendly vigour about their dancing. It doesn't have an atmosphere of solemn piety, though the sense of awe is profound. We do this, says Nisa, when our hearts are happy. And you know, it's such a beautiful description. You could really go on and on. But essentially, this force that is very strongly rooted in the gut area of the body is a kind of synergistic force. It's diffused out through the community and brought back into the bodies of the healers continually. You can't control it, you can't own it. Nobody fully can sum it up or even really fully understand it, because it's one of these slippery kind of elemental almost body concepts that nobody can claim. They're located very strongly in the uterus area of the body. And it's interesting because the Juntois say that women during their reproductive years have to curb their dancing because their natural nom from puberty onwards is so so hot, so powerful, that if they were to dance as well, they might kind of overflow with this power, this heat, or visceral quality. And so they tend, although there are older women healers who are very, very much respected and do a lot of dancing and healing, women in their reproductive years tend to sing. Their part in raising the heat or the nom is to contribute to singing. And the singing is as visceral and as tangible as the nom is. They say it's like a physical quality. When you can't touch the song, when you can't feel it in the air, the healers can't heal. So they're profoundly connected. So you can spoil your nom by refusing to share it, or by trying to hoard dances. That's people say that kind of will spoil a healer. He won't be able to work as effectively. People won't trust him in the same way. So you have on one hand this very powerful physical quality located in the body that's being used through dances to heal the community, but on the other hand, you can't privatize it, you can't own it. And it took me around to thinking about Jerome Lewis's writing on the Mbengele term Ekila, and Jerome has a brilliant paper on Ekila where he's talking about how central it is to Mbengele thinking the world, and how physically rooted it is, but again how it's owned and shared by the entire community. It's not something that anybody can ever claim for themselves. So now I'm going to just read a paragraph from him on Ekila. He says it defines how the body's vital forces, reproductive potential, productive activities and their products, moral and personal qualities and emotions should be shared so as to ensure that group members experience good health, unproblematic childbirth and child rearing, and successful hunting and gathering. From an Mbengele perspective, these are the basic components of a good life. Although Ekila contributes to the mechanics of a non-explicit egalitarianism, at its most fundamental level, it serves to organise gender roles by defining them as primordial, as bound to bodies and bound to biological processes. Ekila establishes hunting and childbirth as prototypical activities, defining people as men and women, and weaves these roles together in a complex set of interrelationships. The language of cutting and tying is used to elaborate this. Ekila addresses cutting in its discourse on proper sharing and keeping things apart, but simultaneously Ekila ties many things together: smells, gender roles, married couples, sexual politics, cosmology, and egalitarianism as a political, moral, and economic orientation. So you can see in both the Juntois data and in Jerome's writing the way in which, in contrast to thought commitments and responsibilities, corporeal morality is premised on contact. It's premised on, in the nom case, literally of the contact of people during the healing dance. Women, when they're singing to raise the nom, are just, wrapped around each other like a loop, and the singing comes out of that woven body quality, and the physical element of the healing is primary. And with Ekila, the contact is being made between men and women's activities, men and women's bodies, male and female power, game spirits and menstrual blood. People are being connected by this kind of constantly moving polysemic term as it roots down into bodies. In the egalitarian habitus, the continuity of the person from birth onwards with this larger sociokinetic body guarantees that felt morality in which one's able to connect by having experienced the other. That's what I'm arguing. So you know, I think for a long time I thought of morality as something, having been raised an Irish Catholic, to dread. You know, you really just, it was like it was a scary word because it was being imposed on you, and it was Puritan and oppressive, but my understanding of it is completely changing through understanding what a live moral community is. Real morality is painful and it's empowering at the same time. It's less about abstract rights and wrongs than issues of trust and respect. It's somatic. It registers concretely. It affects the gut, the stomach, the lungs, the heart. I think when you're feeling for someone, when you're caring about someone, it always registers immediately in the body. It's not that you think, oh, you know, I'm so sad for her, I'm so hurt for him. It's in your stomach, it's in your lungs, it's a visceral experience of the other. This is what Sarah Hrdy, the biological anthropologist, argues was the great achievement of early modern, the ancestors of early modern humans, was this kind of emotional modernity, this ability to be connected to other people and interest in how they're feeling. And I think that kind of morality, that kind of moral responsibility, that's emotional and visceral, and contains this desire to be similarly known and felt for, as Hrdy argues, would have underlain all subsequent cultural and linguistic developments. So when you put that beside the kind of Irish Catholic morality I grew up with, static, disembodied morality, it's the hierarchical morality, the static morality is dead. It's no longer within the experience of the body, and so it has to be imposed from the outside and against the will. It has lost its living quality because people aren't experiencing it and they're not passing it on to their kids in the same way. Hunter-gatherers like the Mbengele offer this striking contrast in their privileging of motion over stasis, sharing over privatization, contact and physical, this physical contact over control, and there's a huge emphasis on that from birth onwards, that children are not only held by a huge amount of different people, they're also co-fed. So babies are being breastfed by whoever happens to have milk at any given time. There's the extending of the baby and the child's body out into this collective body that isn't literal, it's not just metaphorical, it's physical. You know, when you're sharing milk, when you're sharing sweat, when you're sharing the energetic labour of holding and soothing other people's kids, the whole possibilities for the body are extended away out beyond this little individual ego that we are very good at living with, or maybe not so good at living with. So both the Mbengele and Juntois refer to an embodied source of power or heat located in the gut area, cultivated through these cultural and ritual practices. This core power that's expressed for the community through spirit or healing dances that flows out of and into the person simultaneously. Ekila and Nom belong to individuals, but they're inseparable from the collective body, which brings to mind things like the Buddhist concept of the hara or vital center, which is also located around the gut area. A lot of cultures have that, actually, the idea of this core kind of power, a body power that's not so developed there, but you can find it. So to me, this is corporeal morality. It's kind of like the biochemistry of the community. Its heat, its velocity is stored in individuals using the cultural containers of Aquila and Nom. And you can feel in the data on Nom this immense power of how to be generous. How you can be generous whenever the source of social and political power, not to mention spiritual power and energy, is located in your own body and cultivated in your own body from birth onwards. You have this idea of generosity as power and stinginess as weakness, as caring and sharing as having this powerful kind of gracefulness in it, where hoarding and withholding have a brittle, small quality. So that the scarcity mentality that defines so much of modern society, modern hierarchical society, comes to seem very small beside this opening out, generous quality that's cultivated through Nom and Aquila, which comes back again to Eros and the flow quality embedded in that concept, this carnivalesque kind of bendiness or openness that goes beyond the individual personality. And the Mbengele seem to be cultivating this personal poise or earthed element hand in hand with dynamism and fluidity. The responsibility for controlling power is centered in the gut and the solar plexus area of every individual, so that people are able to experience the wider kind of spillage of that big spiritual power that the Juntois talk about when they talk about Nom. You can only experience that by being rooted into the communal body. And that again is comes back to the idea of a politics of Eros. So for me, hunter-gatherers like the Mbengele turn Cartesian dictates on their head by suggesting that it's the removal of the self to a small area around the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, i.e. the rational analytical brain, which leads to all subsequent dissociation and anomie and failure to manifest fully in the world. And in fact, there's a great writer on social trauma, Van der Kolk, who has a groundbreaking study of trauma in society called The Body Keeps the Score. And he suggests that it's knowing nothing about the anthropological literature, that it's only via a return to the sensory world, it's only via a return to body intelligence and the reunification of things like the sympathetic nervous system with the emotional brain, with the center of self-awareness, the medial prefrontal cortex. It's linking up all these parts of the flow within the body that will allow people to experience themselves as connected and alive. And he uses a lot of things like dance, breath, yoga as ways to try to bring people who've been highly traumatized either as children or later back down into the body. For him, it's all about rooting in that vital center, which is exactly what people like the Mbengele are recognizing from birth, that to be a complete person, you need to be able to access that physical, sexual root that becomes the foundation for women's coalitionary voice. So these kinds of egalitarian social systems are offering a striking contrast to hierarchy, and they're privileging of this kind of sensuous tactile flow. And I've argued that their expertise is in virtual structure, where social power is shared by being continually circulated around the community. And here we can see two powerful mechanisms for doing that in Nom and Aquila, respectively. By keeping the experience of the body public, they epitomize back teens, the great generic body of the people, this intensely political moving force that sort of breathes sociality. Egalitarian systems are striking in their physical respect for children, as I've said, and for the way in which infants are communally parented. Everything's pooled. And I was thinking about this, thinking about the literature on coalitionary ritual, and thinking about the ethnography on the likes of the Mbengele, with these qualities, these kind of more slippery, deeper qualities of Nom and Aquila that are the energy of egalitarianism, really. And I was thinking about the relationship with children, and the fact that, you know, just as we know we make our children, but they also make us. Just as they learn contact from us or not, we learn it from them. They teach us how to touch, how to hold, how to nurture this vital life energy in the human, how to be tender, how to be generous, not only with resources and time and energy, but literally with our own bodies. And I also thought that children, where they're culturally central and held at the crux of that collective social body, are a big force in teaching, in keeping going the play element. You know, how to be loopy and irreverent and jumpy, and so many of the things that we as a culture spend our entire time trying to drum out of them. So I thought, is it any wonder they're kind of, you know, siphoned off from the rest of society? Because they're dangerous to the male collective body in isolation from its female counterpart. They're dangerous to the male collective body separated from its paternal its paternal part in this dialogue that goes on between maternal, paternal and children. And among the Mbengele or the Juntois, they approach puberty held at the crux of the social body. Young people are actually being encouraged to engage in practices that will cultivate the substance located in their solar plexus area and connected through all these webs of relationship, meaning and metaphor to the vitality of the larger body. They're encouraged to cultivate the root of their own moral capacity through fostering ritual and social connections to everything and everyone around them. So they're actively involved in the weaving of their own bodies into this molecular system. What are we cultivating? What are they cultivating when they cultivate Aquila or Nom? What are we trying to cultivate when we talk about things like the Hara? It's basically responsibility to the communal body, accountability to all the other bodies of which we are part and on which we depend. And I don't think it's a surprise that men particularly have been encouraged to ritually cultivate this quality, Aquila or Nom. Like I said earlier, the Juntois say women's Nom automatically flares up at puberty and remains volatile for the rest of their cycling life. So this is an element women automatically, by virtue of their cycling reproductive body, are believed to have access to. The focus for male healers in Nom, or for Mbengele men who are really trying to build up strong Aquila, is in being able to share everything that you have with your community. That increases and strengthens your Aquila or your Nom. Being able to observe the communal principles through your own physical conduct in the world. So not only are they offering access to a moral universe, they're also a kind of constant cautioning that if you want this beautiful heat or energy that everyone cherishes, you need to be able to adhere to shared principles, shared egalitarian principles. Using the insights of Sarah Hardy into the emergence of emotional modernity among cooperative breeders, I suggested that what lies at the heart of this live molecular system isn't as a lot of recent writing on egalitarianism, the evolution of egalitarianism suggest, warfare or intramural exchange networks, or necessarily even sex, but babies and children and the coalitionary muscle that evolved to protect them and to keep them culturally central. I asked what connects cognitive and emotional intelligence, and the answer seems to be everywhere to do with this articulate, socially responsible and inherently joyful common body. By this measure, the kinds of hierarchical capitalist gerontocracies that we now see dominating globally, based on male collective imperatives, territory, virility, quantity over quality, working directly against the survival needs of children and the rest of us, are fundamentally immoral. So anthropology is perfectly placed to examine and describe the egalitarian alternative, organic corporeal morality.